Welcome back to YouTube. I wanted to make a video going through some of the basics about Epstein-Barr virus. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about Epstein-Barr virus latency and the Lytic reactivation, and also the role of immune competence in living with EBV once you've been infected. So who am I? My name is Robin Puglia. I am a nutritional therapist and functional medicine practitioner. I do a lot of professional mentoring. I am the founder and principal of the Autoimmune Academy, which is a mentoring program for physicians and other nutrition professionals and allied health professionals who want to deep dive into working with autoimmune disease in clinical practice. I do a lot of education for universities, nutrition colleges, private education programs, labs and supplement companies, and multiple other things as well. Why am I talking about EBV? So I'm talking about EBV specifically, and I'll be talking about EBV a lot this year for two reasons. Number one, I'm very fascinated with viruses and viral immunology and the immune system. I love to understand it, understand how it's applicable to clinical practice, and to understand the science and the mechanisms. But in the last 5 years, and very especially in 2025, there was a lot of new interesting research around the role of EBV in the development of autoimmune disease. So in autoimmunity in general, but a lot of papers really looking at autoimmune disease and Epstein-Barr virus and multiple sclerosis and Epstein-Barr virus and lupus specifically. Additionally, it is currently January 2026, so we are just about 5 full years post-pandemic. And of course, there has been a lot of recognition that acute infection and SARS-CoV-2 especially creates reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus. So a lot of people are presenting in our clinics with reactivated EBV, and a lot of people that I work with and that my community works with who have a diagnosed autoimmune disease, lupus, multiple sclerosis, are concerned about what they're reading and what they're hearing about the role of Epstein-Barr virus in the development of and the perpetuation of that autoimmune disease. So I wanted to talk about it. Especially because I think that there's a couple of things about these papers that are being maybe misunderstood or misdiscussed, let's just say. So there is a lot of binary thinking around Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus tends to be discussed in a very black and white way as the bad guy. Greater than 90% of the population are already globally are infected with EBV. It is somewhere between 92 and 95% of the population. And that leads to the discussion that EBV is not important because we all have it. The test results are just showing that you have been infected, and outside of glandular fever or its role in things like specific types of cancer, EBV can be dismissed or misunderstood. On the other side of the conversation is that EBV is the root cause of everything, and EBV must be eradicated. And this sort of magic bullet thinking that happens, where if I can eradicate my EBV, then my autoimmune disease will be cured, then my chronic fatigue will be cured, right? That there's if we can latch onto EBV as being the root cause, then eradication of EBV becomes an obvious hope for resolution of the issue that the person is struggling with. That IgG antibodies to EBV indicate only past infection, and that EBV won't be relevant to a case if there are not IgM antibodies indicating current acute or lytic infection. And also, it's important to understand, and I don't know that this is understood well enough, that EBV is a herpes virus. It is part of the herpes virus family. And that is important because it helps us understand the context for EBV. So there are 8 human herpes viruses, and we all know that when somebody has a cold sore, right, we know that cold sore is a herpes virus, and we know that when somebody gets stressed out or run down before their wedding, before an exam, when they're on a deadline, when they have a cold, that their immune system becomes susceptible and they will end up with a cold sore blister. And it is for this reason that is a visible reactivation of a herpes virus. It creates a lesion. And we also know that people who are susceptible to cold sores get cold sores when they're run down, when they've had too much to drink or a big night out, when they're stressed, or when they, that there are when their immune system is susceptible. And that is why I think it's important to understand that EBV is a herpes virus, is because it is the same, right? EBV lives in the body. Once you've been infected, it is now part of your immune system in the same way that herpes simplex is. And when you are stressed, when you are run down, when you have another cold, when there is anything else going on that affects your immune system, you can have a flare of EBV in the same way that that person is having a flare with the herpes simplex cold sore. It's just not visible to the naked eye. And because it's not visible to the naked eye, sometimes it is more difficult to join the dots between what is going on internally and a flare of an invisible virus. So the distinction that it's a herpes virus does change everything. So in the herpes virus family, which by the way includes chickenpox, and it's that 8 virus family. Once you have established initial infection, and with EBV, 50% of people who are infected with EBV are infected before the age of 5, and the other 50% are infected in teenage or adulthood. And of that 50% that's infected as a teen or as an adult, 30% of that 50% will develop an acute infection that we call mononucleosis or glandular fever, or we might register that as a bad cold or a bad flu, right? It's 30% of the 50%. However, once you've been infected, the herpes virus family establish lifelong latency after that initial infection. In EBV specifically lives in B cells in the immune system, which are the cells that are part of the adaptive immune system that are responsible for recognizing other infections, but also that are responsible for making antibodies and plasma cells. EBV also can infect and stay latent in epithelial cells, so the cells that line the gut, the skin cells. So B cells and epithelial cells tend to be where EBV live post-infection. And what happens then is you can see in the image here, in a latent infection, EBV will be quite shut down inside the cell. So there are stages of latency. Tight latency is latent 0. EBV does not make any viral proteins whatsoever. It is considered dormant and quiet, and it is living in harmony with the cell, living in harmony with the immune system. But then there are higher stages of latency where it's kind of more woken up. And in each stage of latency, it will be making viral proteins, but not full viruses. We have a latent infection inside the cell can create immortalization of the cell. So the signaling of that cell isn't happening appropriately anymore because of the presence of the virus, and the cell doesn't die at the end of its life cycle in the way that a healthy cell would. So it becomes immortal, and this creates a slow, secure amplification of the viral presence in the body. Now, you can be perfectly healthy with EBV, and so the fact that you have EBV does not guarantee that you are going to end up with cancer or an autoimmune disease or chronic fatigue syndrome. However, if there is the correct immune variables, for example, stress, then EBV has the ability to switch from latent life cycle up into lytic life cycle. In its lytic life cycle, it is in active infection. It is attaching to the DNA of the cell and creating whole new viruses. Those new viruses are spreading from the cell and infecting other cells in the body, and that host, that human, can also infect other people. So it is infectious at that point. In latency, we're not creating a massive immune response. There's not a lot of inflammation, although the higher the stages of latency and the more proteins are being made, the more immune reactions are occurring, the more inflammatory, the more inflammation can be made. But in lytic infection, we have the strongest immune responses generated because we are able to detect whole viruses, which should be triggering an appropriate immune response. So in a healthy immune system, we have a whole series of antiviral cells and antiviral communication mechanisms that help to keep that EBV in harmony, in check. However, when there is any type of variable that affects the immune system, and the immune system ability to keep the virus in check changes, then the landscape of that virus changes and it is able to increase its latent replication or reactivate up into full infectious lytic life. So EBV is common, 90 up to 95% of the population, but whether or not it is relevant if you have an illness depends on the context. So the presence of EBV doesn't equal relevance. It isn't necessarily part of the story, even if you have it and even if you are sick. EBV becomes more of an interesting variable when it appears in post-viral syndromes. So long COVID, we are thinking about Epstein-Barr reactivation. CFS, right, the chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic fatigue fibromyalgia type categories, we are thinking about whether or not EBV is a variable, yes or no. Autoimmune diseases, we are thinking about it. Poor resilience under stress, we are thinking about it. And chronic or relapsing fatigue that can be debilitating or life-changing, we are thinking about whether or not EBV is a variable, because it's most likely that you do have it. So then we need to understand, is it part of the picture here? And for some people, EBV is the cause. When they have that glandular fever, they are never well since. Once they get EBV, EBV is a cause of such big changes in the body that they now are going on to develop an autoimmune disease, that they now are going on to develop chronic fatigue syndrome, right? That it can be a cause. But in order for that body to be susceptible for EBV to be able to be that cause, the immune system has to be in a state that is susceptible for that type of dysregulation. So a healthy person who contracts EBV, the probability of that healthy person who has healthy adaptive immune responses going on to develop a significant health condition from EBV alone is low. It's not zero, but it isn't high. So the relevance is contextual. Does this person already have dysbiosis? Do they have food reactions? Do they have an undiagnosed autoimmune disease? Do they have oxidative stress? Are they already inflamed for some other reason? Are they already very stressed for some other reason? And so EBV can be the cause, but if it is a cause, there's context there. So EBV, in fact, is a clue that there is more to the immune system story than is maybe obvious up until the point of EBV. So what the medical literature tells us is that what is now considered about EBV, the papers are actually kind of saying this in a black and white way, is that it is necessary for the development of an autoimmune disease. And that so that EBV is necessary. But the context of the paper is it is necessary but not sufficient by itself. So to develop an autoimmune disease, we have to have genetic predisposition, we need to have existing immune system dysregulation, and we need to have an environmental trigger. And EBV can absolutely be one of the environmental triggers that initiates or perpetuates autoimmune disease. But by itself, it is insufficient. So you can see in this image, which I got from the medical literature, that EBV alongside other antigens such as food antigens or bacterial antigens, COVID, epigenetic modifications, alongside immune system dysregulation, alongside genetic predisposition. So EBV alone is not sufficient to cause an autoimmune disease. So it is necessary, but it is only part of the story. It is only part of the picture. And what that means is that we cannot narrow our focus to only EBV with the thought that if we can eradicate EBV, that we will eradicate autoimmune disease, or if we can control the EBV that we have in our body, that will by itself create remission of the autoimmune disease. It is necessary, but it is insufficient alone. So EBV labs can be a little bit difficult to interpret, partially because positive IgG results are dismissed as irrelevant. I actually have a whole video which you will find here in my YouTube on interpretation of EBV test results. But some of the confusion comes from the fact that, in fact, early antigen IgG is one of our best markers for viral reactivation. It isn't run as standard, and it is an IgG marker, and we are taught that IgG antibodies indicate past infection only. The second confusing variable is that IgM is not a reliable marker. So for some people, IgM does pop up with reactivation, and for some people it doesn't, and for some people it does sometimes but not other times, which makes the absence of IgM in an antibody result, the absence is does not tell us that there isn't reactivation, which makes, again, it creates a layer of confusion. EBV also needs to be, so either the positive markers need to be interpreted in the context of immune capacity. Does this person have enough antibody response? Do they have enough immune response to create the test results that allow us to see EBV as being a problem? Because another mechanism that EBV has as for successful viral replication is that it changes the immune system. It exhausts and depletes the immune system, and that can change test results when we are measuring immune responses. And we need to think about EBV results in the context of the whole immune terrain. Additionally, it is also why protocol-driven EBV protocols that just focus on EBV are not very successful by themselves, because if we're just looking to reduce the viral numbers and focusing on antiviral strategy, it doesn't actually support the body's susceptibility to reactivation. So we need to be thinking about EBV, of course, but we also need to be thinking about the terrain that has allowed EBV to be a problem. So key takeaways are the most useful way to think about EBV in practice is EBV is a deeply problematic, mischievous virus that is capable of causing autoimmunity, causing debilitating fatigue, causing cancer. It is not black and white that if you have EBV that you are going to go on to develop any type of complex chronic illness, including the ones that EBV is strongly associated with. Just because you have, or just because your client or patient has lupus or multiple sclerosis does not mean that EBV is directly driving or was an initiating factor for the development of that autoimmunity. And EBV is not actually the root problem. Instead, it reveals the root problem, right? Somebody that is susceptible to EBV doesn't mean that we don't need to aggressively support the immune system and target EBV, but that isn't the whole picture. EBV is a clue. It is telling us that there is a bigger problem with the immune system that needs to be addressed. So there is multiple stages to EBV strategy. And we need to be thinking about what has caused loss of immune control, reduced resilience to viral infection, what has put the system, the cell system, the immune system under a significant chronic load that has allowed EBV to be a problem. And when we start to interpret EBV as an immune message, as communication, rather than just narrowing it down to a pathogen that we need to eradicate, then our decision making actually becomes clearer and outcomes improve. We are significantly more effective in our clinical strategy. So if EBV keeps popping up in your cases, if you have been reading the literature, if your clients and patients have been coming to you and asking about whether or not EBV is relevant for them, the first step is not crafting the perfect antiviral strategy, right? It's understanding when EBV matters. Is it relevant to this case? Is it relevant to this person? And when it doesn't, because you don't want to spend time, money, and this person's life chasing after a virus that is an appropriate strategy in the medical literature, but not for the individual that you're working with. So I do have an EBV practitioner guide that walks through how EBV behaves in the immune system, how to understand when it's relevant, clinical patterns to look for that will help you understand, is EBV relevant for this case, yes or no? More on the immune context, and I will link that below. In upcoming videos, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into EBV and the cofactors when EBV appears alongside other viruses like COVID or the other herpes viruses that I've talked about in this video, when we see EBV with mold, when we see EBV with autoimmunity, and how this fits into sequencing. How do you actually think about and approach EBV in that context? So if this was helpful and you would like to know more, please subscribe so that you get notified when I create and add a new video. I add the videos about the 7th of the month every month. And so you can pop that in your diary if that would be helpful for you. Again, do feel free to download my practitioner ebook that goes into more detail. And I also have another video already published on interpreting EBV test results. So thank you so much for your attention today, and I will see you in the next video. Feel free to pop any questions in the comment section, and I will keep an eye there to stay in conversation with you all. Thanks.